It's time for Paleo Radio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Thank you, friends, neighbors, and everybody in between. My name is Joe Elder.
I'm the one and only Jeremiah Bannister.
And this is Paleo Radio. Thank you all here in Grand Rapids, listening on 95.3 FM, 1680 AM, WPRR Grand Rapids. We appreciate it very much.
And all of our friends listening on Spreaker and iTunes, totally amazing human beings, obviously super intelligent.
Absolutely. And other parts of the intranet. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I couldn't be doing any better. The whole family is flying on Cloud 9 because we got our St. Bernard puppy.
You got the St. Bernard, the old Beethoven.
Yeah, and her name is Coco, and she's amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Huge legs and paws.
Yeah, you're going to have to post a video of that on our page, which we definitely will. We got some awesome articles that are coming up. We're going to lead right in with an anti-war article, Why the War Party Dominates the Media.
And then we're going to talk about NASA creating a planetary defense coordination office that will track meteors headed toward the Earth. This is over at End of the American Dream at IntelliHub.
After that, we're going to take a look at Sheldon Richman. Whatever's happening in Oregon, it's not terrorism.
That's going to be an interesting discussion.
Yes, it is.
And then the last one, this is going to be a lot of fun, man. There's an article over at QZ.com called There's a Good Reason Americans Are Horrible at Science, and this is by physician and researcher Danielle Teller. It's over at QZ.com.
We're going to start out right away with Justin Raimondo, Why the War Party Dominates the Media, Realism versus Reality, Understanding Why We Never Seem to Learn from Mistakes. This is from antiwar.com. Stephen Walt has an excellent, albeit incomplete piece in Foreign Policy magazine that raises an important question. What accounts for the lack of anti-interventionist voices in the mainstream media?
Go on a little further with this. Walt uses the term realist as a synonym for anti-interventionist, in part because Foreign Policy is a quasi-academic journal, and in part because Walt is one of the leading advocates of the realist school, i.e., the school that sees foreign policy as a function of states vying for power in a world where good intentions don't account for much. It's a pessimistic view.
It is, but he's sliding it in there because if you say non-interventionist, people take that as being very weak for some reason. They see it as someone walking by in a playground and seeing somebody bullying somebody and not stopping to make a stand and just kind of walking by.
And as a specific thing, too. You know,
Absolutely.
to say, like realism, it's very true. Realism is a broad label. It's huge. There's all different sorts of people that can fit under this. In fact, we quote pretty regularly here. We quote antiwar.com. That's one of the sites that we quote. We also quote the American Conservative pretty regularly, although it's been a while, man. I think it's back and forth. But we've quoted them a lot for it's true.
Yeah.
We're giving them good media attention. But both of those have their representatives in the realist camp. You know, in fact, American Conservative there was something over at Georgetown that they did not too long ago that was all about realism and foreign policy and everything like that. And so, very involved in it, but it's a broad label. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you've got Raimondo. He's an anarcho-capitalist. You've got, I would say Buchanan is a realist. I'd say that Rod Dreher is a realist. Daniel Larison's a realist. So I would say these guys are realists, and they're not anarcho-libertarians, and they're not gay like Justin Raimondo. So I mean, there's big differences here. So yeah, I think public perception of what anti-interventionist is, I think that's wrong, and I think the same thing with realism.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think calling it realism is just kind of adjusting it for the times. It's having a non-interventionist foreign policy. I don't see anything wrong with that. I honestly think that when America was as prosperous as it could be, it was in those times where it said, look, we don't meddle in the affairs of others. We, even having deep-seated allies, it can make a mistake. It can easily be the foundation to make mistakes.
I like how you brought up when people think of anti-interventionism, it's like they think of weakness in a way. You know, and I hope I'm understanding it correctly.
Absolutely,
but
that's
like,
what I'm saying.
Yeah, that it's almost pacifistic. right, in this way that says, even if you're raping my wife, I won't raise a hand. And if anybody thinks that's dramatic, I've read a book against war, in fact. It's an anti-war book written, if I remember, by a Mennonite. And he brings this up and talks about it.
Ooh.
But that saying that I'm not interventionist is something, it's a far cry. I mean, it's a long ways away from saying, I don't believe you should be able to defend yourself.
Absolutely. Well, saying you're a realist is just linguistically, it's a stronger word. I say, when someone says, oh, you're a non-interventionist, and I come back and say, no, I'm a realist. That means something linguistically to people. That makes a difference. Where you're saying, no, I'm being practical. I'm not looking at it just, with the red, white, and blue gaze of bombs and bullets and missiles.
Right, and that those can just get rid of the bad guys.
Yep, we talk about it all the time. It's just a big board, and all you have to do is write the bad guys' names on them, and you just kill them and cross them off, and then that's over. The end of movie, roll credits.
And that if America just shows leadership, and strong leadership at that, and tells the world I'm going to lead everything, that the world's just going to fall into place.
Absolutely.
That's all it takes.
And, we can't look back at history to think of other nations or other big empires that have done this. Britain. What we need to do is go over there to Scotland and just really enforce the law, and that's what's gonna squash this rebellion. Historically, it doesn't usually seem to favor them.
I like what Raimondo says here when he says, one can say that the realist school is inherently more cautious than its rivals, liberal internationalism and neoconservatism, when it comes to intervening in foreign conflicts. Dude, that is Paleo Radio.
Absolutely.
That really is exactly like we criticize on the regular, right, all the time. It's always under our craw, the liberal internationalism.
Absolutely.
Right, neoconservatism. These things literally seem to bother us. If a fair assessment of our own statements being made, that those are things that really, really bother us. And when we talk about things and we criticize things, we really do come from that more inherently cautious perspective.
In actuality, I would wave the flag of saying I'm a realist in this sense. I agree with that. That's what makes me cautious of both sides. Anytime I hear somebody talking about going overseas, I can even be downright constitutional about it and say I want an actual constitutional declaration of war before we go anywhere. And other than that, we're intervening in sovereign airspace or sovereign land.
It's at least inherently cautious to say,
Sure.
Listen, we need to have some kind of checks and balances here on how we declare war, who declares war, how war is declared, etc. Let me read this, man. This is from Raimondo, and this quote is just awesome. And I want literally everybody just listen and ask yourself: is this something that I can relate to? Right? Is this something that I can identify with? He says this, quote, "The realist analysis of foreign policy holds that nations are motivated by their self-interest, or more accurately, by what they perceive to be their self-interest. Yet nations are not floating abstractions or collective entities. They're ruled by individuals, and these individuals also obey the same laws. That is, they act in ways they imagine to be in their self-interest. And what does this self-interest consist of? It is nothing more or less than the continuation and expansion of their power."
There you go.
And by expansion, as soon as somebody throws an expansion, I can imagine people going, well, I'm not all for that. But the continuation of it, no doubt.
Oh,
the continuation of their own power, the idea that they're like, I'd rather not at least have prestige.
Why else would we have at least troops in every single country we've pretty much been in and occupied? I mean, there's still at least a small number of troops in almost every area that we've had a war in. They've never left, and that's an extension of power. It's building of a regime. But also, this is something from the article that I noticed. Realists have a pretty good record, especially when it comes to engaging in war. Walt's piece details the realist record when it comes to issues of the past 2 decades or so and draws an inevitable conclusion. They've been right about practically everything. They predicted that nation building in Afghanistan would come to naught. George Kennan, perhaps the quintessential realist, inveighed against the post-Cold War push to expand NATO, accurately predicting that it would lead to unnecessary conflict with Russia and the renewed threat of World War III. And there's also the critics of the Clinton-era policy of dual containment, and there's also what went on in Libya.
In Libya.
So, I mean, there is a record.
Iraq, Afghanistan, NATO with the whole Russia and the whole, I don't know, what's going on in Syria, proxy war thing, and what's going on in Yemen. The dual containment, Iraq and Iran, still exactly as described, the Libyan intervention, that it was doomed to fail. And it's kind of a weird thing, trying to rise above it in a bird's eye view and saying, there's a school of thought out there, a philosophical school of thought regarding foreign policy that's accurately predicting over and over and over and over the result of interactions and saying this is how it's going to play out and this is why it's going to play out. And to be seen how they're right. And yet, getting back to even the title of the article, they're nowhere to be found in mainstream media.
Nowhere to be found.
They're nowhere. They're an extinct species. It's like they're not real. They're unicorns. What? Realists? Well, that just sounds absurd.
Well, Raimondo has a reason for it. He believes that the War Party dominates the three major media outlets that are English-speaking in the world.
Yeah,
Correct?
Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post.
Yeah, and he also thinks Washington Post is the worst, saying, quote, their editorial director, Fred Hyatt, is an unabashed warmonger with the rest of his crew, Charles Krauthammer, we know him, Robert Kagan, Jackson Dale, and a list of others that are dyed-in-the-wool neocons.
Totally neocons. Wall Street Journal, same thing, dominated by neocons. New York Times, though, is the flip side. That's liberal internationalism.
Yeah.
Right? Being on the side of certain interventions, but not certain wars. And depending kind of on who's in office at the time. I mean, all that's kind of there.
It's funny that in matters of war and banking, that's the only thing that liberals and conservatives agree on that I completely disagree with entirely, is war and banking. They both agree in areas that I think they shouldn't.
And, dude, this is so crazy, like, to think about it and to say, it's true, isn't it, that the American people are naturally isolationists.
Sure.
Right? That they're generally reluctant to go along with the war party schemes to invade this or that country. And I love how Raimondo said, he said, this is true not only because they have little interest in what goes on overseas. Okay, like, I don't care what happens over there. It's not my country. But also because they're skeptical of our ability to affect events. And not to mention there's so many problems at home.
Absolutely. When people believe that they can't be convinced of anything, that makes them the most convincible. It makes them more liable to believe things. People don't believe that we can play as hard of a hand as we actually play overseas, and I think it's why they don't care about it. Also, we've been dumbed down, to be honest, here in America.
We'll be right back, right after this, with more Paleo Radio.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
We want to thank one of our newest Twitter followers, Linda Beatty, passionate atheist, comedian, singer-songwriter, creator of atheist comedy web show The Bible and Other Fairy Tales. Thank you very much for the follow.
That's a huge follow.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Linda seems pretty dang awesome.
Super pumped. We're also super pumped about this whole new Planetary Defense Coordination Office, Joe.
Yeah, don't worry, though. Nothing's changed.
Nothing has changed. No reason to be afraid.
Yep. NASA's just learning there's way more things in space that are coming to nail us.
Okay, the article here. NASA creates a Planetary Defense Coordination Office that will track meteors headed toward Earth. This is by Michael Snyder at End of the American Dream over at IntelliHub.com. And fair warning, I don't know much about IntelliHub, but I went to the links within this, and they were all to the links that they were saying that they were to, and I went and I read some of those. We're going to cite some of those. But I think it's kind of conspiratorial, I think.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and kind of tabloidish.
We're totally playing along. This is fun, though.
Yeah, but it's a real story. I mean, it's a true story.
It is. I have a good theory on why NASA's doing this.
On why NASA... Well,
yes.
This is exciting.
And it doesn't require a tinfoil hat at all.
No, I'm going to wear it anyway. So, why is NASA suddenly so concerned about meteors and asteroids hitting the Earth? After telling us that, quote, no large object is likely to strike the Earth any time in the next several hundred years, end quote, and this was just last year. NASA is now spending millions of dollars to set up a Planetary Defense Coordination Office that will be headed up by a designated Planetary Defense Officer.
Oh, yes. Planetary Defense Officer. Not a big job at all.
That's got to be a czar. I'm surprised that they didn't call it, like, a czar or some kind of...
well,
although, hey, man...
I'm sure he gets his name on a window in an office.
Wouldn't you love to be called that, a Planetary Defense Officer, that's literally your title from the government?
Who could you not impress in a bar? Oh, yeah, you're a DJ? That's pretty cool. I'm a planetary defense officer.
It sounds like Men in Black.
It does.
I mean, it just
like
does.
Star Trek or something like that.
So, according to NASA, more than 13,500 near-Earth objects have been found so far, and another 1,500 new NEOs are being discovered each year. Approximately 10% of all near-Earth objects are 1 kilometer or larger in size. And if one of those giant space rocks ever hit us, it would likely be considered an extinction-level event.
Absolutely, just like what happened to the dinosaurs. And it's quite likely the way planets formed in space is by gaining more mass and pulling more gravitational, having a bigger gravitational pull and pulling more objects into them. And I mean, it's a very destructive way of a planet building, and that's exactly how we've gotten to it. So it's not a surprise that there's a lot of things twirling about in space.
And if you would like to see this a little bit, Cosmos.
Sure.
Right? Cosmos in one of the episodes is talking about how all of this works and how things smash together. And so the idea that, that's out of the ballpark.
No.
It's kind of a little bit absurd. But here is the weird thing, is there weren't many media outlets that really covered this story.
No, they don't view it very... I don't know if people think it's very shticky, but also we are reading it from IntelliHub, so maybe it is a little shticky.
Right. But CNBC talked about it, and over there, NASA said that the recently passed fiscal year 2016 federal budget included some $50 million for observing NEOs and the new PDCO, a more than tenfold increase in funding since President Obama took office.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, hey... that's a good thing. Well, I know to this site it was like, what's going on with this? Yeah. And it's like, actually, that's kind of a good...
Well, here's my crazy theory. Just like you read before, you said, according to NASA, there's more than 13,500 near-Earth objects, and they're finding about 1,500 new ones each year. That's maybe why they're increasing some funding and checking it out and going, wait, maybe this is way more likely than we were thinking. Now, not to say that it's extremely likely, but looking at the trajectory of these meteors and seeing how close they may be to the Earth or the Moon, that could be important.
And we're seeing so much more of the universe now.
Absolutely.
I mean, we really are, all the time.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Better
technology. Right. We landed on one of these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. The article asks, if there's no threat, why go through so much trouble and effort? Well, because there is a threat. And here's the thing, is and maybe, some conspiratorialists might have a difficult time with this, but the idea that science can change its mind and say, based on new evidence, we now have a new calculation, that's not a crazy thing for people involved in science to say. And so to say, according to newest data, now it seems to be some issue. What would basic preparedness? I mean, think about it. Let's say that the probability was not urgent, like an imminent threat, but definitely something that's in the ballpark, something you should really honestly kind of be prepared for, like you would be prepared for anything else, like a fire or a car accident or anything like that. What would it cost if you're trying to nudge?
Oh, man.
The thing is, it's going to cost a lot of money.
Sure.
The idea, it's a tenfold increase.
You're going to need the technology to do something like that. I had the opportunity to listen to a Neil deGrasse Tyson in Grand Valley, and it was really entertaining. But at the end, he was answering questions, and there was a young boy that asked about it, and they were talking about blowing it up, and the young boy had said that was a bad idea, and he kind of stole Tyson's line and said it was because, sending like a rocket up there just to blow it all up. A lot of times these meteors are not actually all one object. There are a bunch of them that have conglomerated in space due to gravitational pull, and it's kind of like a floating blob of debris. And to do that can scatter it about. So there's got to be a way of sending up an object that has a magnetic pull and thrusters and guides them off a trajectory. But there's tons of physics to it. It would take a lot of money, basically, what you're saying, and that's why there would be an increase in it.
And not only that, but we have a president, unlike the Bush administration, that actually believes in science. So, I mean, that can also explain why you'd have an increase in the amount of money over his whole term, right? Of almost 8 years now. Oh, it's been a large increase in science under Obama compared to Bush. Not surprising. But, yeah, asteroid redirect. Right, that's what they're talking about. And how do you do an asteroid redirect? Tyson needs to talk to these guys because they're talking about nudging these things off course with the possible use of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and I think it would depend on different people's theories of how that would come about and how far away they would be. I know that I'll have to look it up here, but in 2028, I know we're supposed to have a meteor that, according to its trajectory right now, a pretty big one, is going to pass between the moon and Earth. And it's going to be a beast. So it's just to say that this is it's a real thing. There's an astronomer, Dr. Garrels. He says, quote, "We've calculated the basis of what we know of the Earth's impact history, and during a human lifespan of 66 years, there's a 1 in 5,000 chance of a major impact."
Better than the Powerball.
Way better than the Powerball.
Better than the Powerball.
If you think you can win the Powerball, then you damn sure should believe you could get hit by an asteroid.
It's a thing. And these asteroids, we're talking huge things. They're talking as big as 1 kilometer.
Yeah, and and that would be devastating. Think about the one in Russia. That was not even 100 feet. Wasn't even 100 feet wide.
What did they call that? The super fireball.
Yeah.
Right, it was a super fireball. And there was another one, the Halloween asteroid.
Yeah,
these were not anywhere close to that size.
No. This is another just piece of advice. If you see something really big and shiny coming right down onto Earth, looking through your window is probably not the best idea. Just for a lot of people got hurt by peeking through the window, and then the windows exploded because of the boom, and it broke. And
it's kind of like watching the guy as the tsunami's coming in. The one not a couple years back that was just completely devastating. He's watching from the beach, and this wave is just roaring toward him, and he's just staring. And then next thing you know, he's gone. Same thing. If something's glowing and on fire and raging at you,
yes,
you're gonna want to. You know what? You're gonna want a redirect program. You're going to want an asteroid redirect program. You're going to be like, that wouldn't have been a bad idea, to have one of them buggers.
Absolutely.
That could nudge that thing off course and not just totally destroy you.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen. I'm reading an article from the New York Times. It's called "Asteroid is Expected to Make a Pass Close to Earth in 2028." It's by Malcolm Brown. It's an interesting article, but what I really wanted to get to is he's talking to some different astronomers, and one of them says this: "The impact of an asteroid 1 mile in diameter would have devastating global effects, including tidal waves, continent-sized fires, and an eruption of dust that could cause global cooling and long-term disruption in agriculture. But Dr. Marsden says such an asteroid impact would not necessarily be severe enough to wipe out the human race."
Global cooling is going to turn off a lot of conservatives to the idea of the redirect.
Oh, sure.
They're just going to hear them be like, "I've heard that before in the 70s. That's part of my argument against global warming."
Exactly.
It's obviously part of the master plan.
Like, yeah, all you guys had to throw into the equation was an asteroid hitting Earth, and then all of a sudden, here we go back to what you said before.
Yeah, speaking of going back to what they said before, if intervention is not possible, NASA would provide expert input to FEMA about impact timing, location, and effects to inform emergency response operations. In turn, FEMA would handle the preparations and response planning related to the consequences of atmospheric entry or impact to U.S. communities. And that's according to the Space Agency. So FEMA, global cooling, this is obviously, and telehubs all over this. This is obviously part of the conspiracy, Joe.
Absolutely, it's part of the conspiracy. Yeah. Well, and I think people like to draw conclusions from things they think are secretive. Now, obviously, this isn't very tinfoil hattish, but you can assume that our government doesn't want people to ever be freaked out. They definitely don't want anyone to believe that they're not always under control. And telling someone that they have a 1 in 5,000 chance within their lifespan of dealing with some sort of asteroid coming down, not extinction level event, but witnessing something like that that could actually harm them. I don't think it's something they just want to pass along as general information in the 9 o'clock news. Or, by the way, 1 in 5,000 chance of dying by asteroid. All right, roll it out. How's the weather?
And, of course, that is how they play it in the news. If it was in the news, it would be followed by a Colgate commercial or something like that. You might die in an asteroid strike right after this. And then the next thing is California Raisins singing a song.
17 Razor Gillette Mach 400,000 razor blade.
So you can totally get laid.
Absolutely. There's a free plug right there.
Yeah, right.
The asteroid that I was talking about that's going to come between the moon and Earth is specifically called XF11. It was found in 1997. It is a current object that was named and discovered on December 6th by Dr. James V. Scotty at the University of Arizona. And it's supposed to come within 30,000 miles.
Right.
Pretty damn close.
Right. For the whole size of the universe.
Yeah, pretty
Right.
big object.
Pretty huge honking object. I'd rather not be so close. I mean, what would that be relative terms to geography from, let's say, Grand Rapids?
Well, Dr. Marsden, the observatory official, said in his announcement, quote, "There's still some uncertainty to the computation. On the one hand, it's possible that the meteorite would come scarcely closer than the moon, which is 240,000 miles from Earth. And on the other hand, the object could come significantly closer than the moon. So we're talking within 30,000 miles. So there's a very wide range we're talking here."
If you leave, you can't come back in. Paleo Radio will return.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Joe, we have an awesome comment over on Facebook at facebook.com/Paleo Radio.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, it was underneath. You shared, and I'm so glad you did. You shared, Paleo Radio has exceeded over 10,000 plays. Thank you, Paleocrats.
Yeah, and that's just on Spreaker alone. We still have to look at our iTunes numbers, but thank you guys very much for the support. It is much appreciated. We love each and every one of you.
With all of our hearts.
All
and
of our
especially
hearts.
today, Gregory over on Facebook writes, "It's not enough. Need an hour a day."
Yeah. We wish we could provide an hour a day, and that's up to you, folks. With a
Right.
small donation, you can... No.
Right? less than a Sunday paper.
That's right.
Yeah, and you can find that over at our Patreon. But he also, listen, he said it was one of his top 3 favorite shows.
Yeah, and that is near and dear to our hearts. I know we kind of joke about it, but in truth, that's great to hear. Really much respect. Thank you.
We love hearing that, and we've heard that a couple times where people say it's one of their top 2 or top 3 favorite programs, even sometimes right alongside Seth Andrews. So that's huge compliments.
It's a good feeling when people like what you're doing. Continuing on in the articles that we have lined up here, whatever's going on in Oregon, it's not terrorism. This is a blog by Sheldon Rickman. The words terrorism and terrorist have been used to describe the people now occupying the headquarters of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in sympathy with the Hammonds. CNN reports that, quote, progressives that are opponents to the occupiers refer to them as Al-Qaeda or vanilla ISIS. Some urge government violence against them, which is, quite frankly, ridiculous. In this description, is it fair? One can answer this question regardless of what one thinks of the Hammonds and the occupiers. If terrorism has any reasonable referent, it is the use of violence against non-combatants for a political purpose. The point is to terrorize by killing or injuring non-combatants or destroying their property in an effort to effect change.
And to this date, they haven't killed anybody. No. They've gone on record, at least somebody has gone on record saying, "I'm willing to shoot and I'm willing to die." I mean, that's a real thing.
But that hasn't happened yet, right?
But they clipped a fence.
Yeah. I think it is to note, too, that I believe there's, about 40 people that work 40 hours a week at this center. So these people aren't going to work, and there's only one reason why. It's because a bunch of dudes are at their job with guns that told them that property isn't theirs anymore. They don't have a job anymore. They just took their job and they took that land.
Radical LDS guys from out of state.
Now, you're right. There hasn't been absolute violence yet. I don't think that there necessarily will be, because honestly I kind of view it like there's kind of a game being played. But if the police showed up around that building and they brought firepower, do we not think that there would be shots fired?
What would happen? And I don't have an answer for that.
And,
right.
a lot of people are saying, well, they bring up things like Waco. Well, Waco was a compound that the government went to. This is a government building that the wackos went to.
And took it over.
And took it over and said, this is ours now. And they're armed and saying that property that was once, we can call it the state's or we can call it public because it's a wildlife refuge, is no longer the state's or theirs. It's private property that they own.
Now, we were on No Religion Required not long ago. In fact, it was not this past Sunday, but the Sunday prior. We encourage you to go check it out. It's over on Spreaker. It's a fantastic interview. But during the conversation, this came up, and the prophet Jeremiah, another Jeremiah, brought up that it was terrorism. So did Bobby. And I went out on a limb here, and I said, I'm not entirely sure that I'm comfortable using that term.
Sure.
About them yet. But I think that there's a lot of challenging questions that cut to the heart of our use of the word terrorist. And I didn't say that on the show. I'm saying it on this one. I'm saying that I think that a lot of the questions about this, about, what would you call, for example, something that you asked, what would you call another group of people that took over a building
Yeah.
and did this. So let's say they were all black people,
For
example,
political
or all
purpose.
Muslim people.
Yeah.
And they took it over for a political purpose, but they hadn't hurt anybody. What would those people be called?
Yeah.
They would be called terrorists.
Well, what would we do if the native Indians that are around that area that actually have a treaty that's signed with the United States government, what if they were to take up arms and take over the wildlife refuge?
Yeah, what would you
And
call
said,
that?
and said, we now say that you people who have been coming to work here on Monday don't come to work. We have guns. You don't have a job anymore. In this land, it's ours again. And we're going to hole up here as long as it takes to get it back. What's the response and what's the labeling that happens there? Maybe it's incorrect to call them terrorists. I don't know. It's an open question.
I think that's the heart of my problem with a lot of this. And it's not just with this situation. It predates it. It's talking about how do we properly describe the people who we are with over in Syria. I mean, those people, fundamentally, those people are kind of terrorists. I mean, they just kind of are, but we call them, we have different terms for different kinds of people doing different acts. And I think maybe that's better than using the term terrorist. I think that might be more accurate, and I think categorizing more properly. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think the word terrorist is a statist word, and it actually can apply to both, because if you look at it, if you take a look at what we call a Syrian terrorist, this is a person that if you're in Syria, you may call them a freedom fighter. If you're from Syria, this person's not a terrorist. To the United States, yes. To Syria, they're a freedom fighter. Here in the United States, that person's a freedom fighter. To other people, they're perhaps a terrorist. And to the state, the United States, someone that lives in the country that says, I don't recognize you as a real government. In fact, I'm fervently religious, and I believe that's the highest law that there can be. Oh, and by the way, I have my gun, and I'm taking over one of your buildings.
Well, they believe that they're a valid government. They believe that they don't question the validity of the United States Constitution or of Washington, D.C. as a place where the political seat of power resides, but that is behaving inappropriately. And I kind of have to sympathize to a degree, and I think most people should, when you talk about double jeopardy, when you talk about the suspension of habeas corpus. And when you go back and look and familiarize yourself with the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, because that's at the heart of
and
this.
that's a big deal.
And it was passed right after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and also after the Oklahoma City bombing. It was
which we struggled to call terrorism.
Which we struggled to call terrorism.
By the way.
Right. This is this is not a new conversation necessarily. But in the fervor of this, when this was enacted, you had the support of Republicans and President Bill Clinton, which is so strange because in the way that this is being played out in the public dialogue about it, you have a lot of progressive people who are generally opposed to violence or generally opposed to this kind of legislation, this Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, having no problem with the Hammonds being imprisoned under that.
Well, and they want it to be sentenced to 5 years, which they think is extremely harsh. And this is back to Rickman's article. Even if we grant the worst allegations that the Hammonds wrongfully declined to inform the government that it would be setting the fires, and the one fire was allegedly set to cover up poaching, the actions look nothing like terrorism, which is true. This is why they got the fervent sentence, and it's because the idea was that it wasn't a controlled fire let go. It was a purposeful fire in a wildlife national refuge. Like, think about that. That's why. What
it started on their land.
What should you? Sure, but okay. Right. I live in Cody, Wyoming, which is 15 minutes outside of Yellowstone, and I start a wildfire, a controlled burn wildfire, that I lose control of my property, and it goes into Yellowstone National Park and burns 15 acres.
Are you a terrorist?
No, but should I do 5 years for burning the government area? Not a terrorist, but should I do 5 years? But here's the thing. They started it on their property, but this is the questioning thing about the Hammonds is that it was a purposeful burn into their property. They intentionally burnt government land.
That's what they were charged with. And that's what I'm saying. That's what they were charged with first. Yes. And they paid $400,000 to take care of this. And then later on, okay, and chronologically, the way it played out, the government asked them, said, hey, we are interested in buying your land. And they said no. Mm-hmm. And then after they said no, all of a sudden this comes up. And this is over the exact same crime. Yep. So we're talking double jeopardy. And
that's absolutely wrong.
The realm of double jeopardy, at least.
And now here we need to make the connection between, is the group that's there saying what we're doing is fighting to give the Hammonds back land, or are they saying we're going to fight to get this land back for America? Because that's two different things. If they're all there for the Hammonds, that's that. But they're not just there for the Hammonds. This is people that came from Nevada that already have been playing a political game with the government about property. And so they're not doing it to say we're going to retrieve land and give it just back to the Hammonds and we're going to roll back to Nevada.
Right, and if anybody is wondering about the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, and I don't quote Wikipedia too often, but I will here, it said, those in favor of the bill say that the act prevents those convicted of crimes from thwarting justice and avoiding just punishment by filing frivolous appeals for years on end, while critics argue that the inability to make multiple appeals increases the risk of an innocent person being killed. The act limits the habeas corpus, and this is the article, relief in federal courts for those claiming to have been unlawfully imprisoned. This is once again, this is not a new controversy either. I mean, anyone who followed the Ron Paul campaign, any of the times that he ran, habeas corpus was something he talked about a lot. And honestly, I mean, these guys, I wouldn't be surprised if they voted for Ron Paul.
Sure.
I did too, though. I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing.
I liked Ron
Right.
Paul. I was all right with it, especially because, like our previous segment, he has a non-interventionist foreign policy.
Mm-hmm. You know, but when the setting of the two fires, and I want to quote this here, the actions that brought criminal charges against the Hammonds consisted in setting two fires on their own land in 2001 and 2006. The first to destroy invasive vegetation, the second ostensibly to protect against a wildfire on adjacent land controlled by the central government. On both occasions, the fires unintentionally spread to the government-controlled land. The Hammonds put out the first fire. The second fire reportedly endangered government firefighters, whom the Hammonds knew were in the vicinity.
Yes.
Right. So I mean, this is kind of a complicated mess in a way.
Yes. It
Right.
is.
Some of this is.
Well,
right.
I'll be honest, I don't, and maybe I'm relying too much on I think the double jeopardy thing is wrong, but maybe I'm relying too much on the system here to think that two wildfires that spread into government property aren't whoops-a-daisies, and one of them where they said the Hammonds knew the firefighters were there as well. I just don't necessarily think that they're entirely innocent. I don't think they should be charged with double jeopardy. I don't think the government should be trying to seize their property either. But I also don't think they should be lighting fires that go into wildlife refuges.
Haven't the Hammonds said don't do this?
I believe they have.
I believe they have.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, I don't know what that says about them. Right? I don't know much about the Hammonds personally, right? But it might say something about just how rogue this whole operation is. I mean, even the people that they're claiming to be inspired by for their actions, even those people are saying, don't do it, don't do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that are saying don't do it. There's a lot of them that feel, well, especially the Hammonds, like we've said, they are not necessarily behind this idea. And that's the whole point is it to take public land and give it back to people and just privatize it? Who's going to take a walk in the forest in someone's backyard?
Are they terrorists or are they not? Email us at paleoradioshow@gmail.com. We'll be right back right after this.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact paleoradioshow@gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
Do you love Paleo Radio? Of course you do. Do you know how it's easier to listen to Paleo Radio? By downloading the Spreaker app. You should go and do that right now. You can do it on Google Play.
It's super easy, Joe. In fact, I was listening to our last episode of Paleo Radio while I was at the gym today for just a little while to hear what it sounded like and say, what does it sound like listening on an iPhone with the Spreaker app in a kind of janky set of headphones that you bring to the gym? Sounds AM, FM gold.
Yeah, and that's exactly why you should go and grab it as fast as you can.
All right, we're going to go into our last topic here. There's a good reason Americans are horrible at science. This is by physician and researcher Danielle Teller at QZ.com. She says, surprisingly, despite America's outstanding science credentials, the population at large is not science savvy. I mean, that's kind of a understatement. It's kind of one of those obvious on its face kind of things. All right, but she says about a third of Americans think that there is no sound evidence for the existence of evolution or benefits of universal vaccination. That's one of the points there. And, you know, I thought about it and I said, I remember reading, and I wish I had these notes before me, but there's a book not far from me right now by Michael Shermer that talks about what people believe about ghosts, what they believe about the afterlife or resurrection or any kind, reincarnation, all sorts of things, all over the map kind of a little bit, UFOs, and finds out what they believe. Not very scientifically savvy, at least if you go by anything called a consensus. I mean, that's kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. Carl Sagan, one of my favorites, he said before, quote, "We live in a society exquisitely dependent on science and technology, in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology."
Oh, big time.
Which is absolutely true. I mean, we're doing it right now. I don't understand how the microphone that I'm talking into works entirely, and little do I know about how a computer works entirely either. But here we are broadcasting out to the universe.
But we see this all the time. I mean, and just like the article says, evolution, right? There's a lot of people who believe it's a myth. In fact, I'm on record. There's a video you can go check out life, right? In a past life where I have we have to just bring out that quote sometime. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So people believe evolution's a myth, that vaccines cause autism. I know a lot of people who believe that. I used to be part of that camp.
You know, the chemtrails things. There's a lot of stuff about that. People just don't understand the everyday science. GMOs, that's another one that we've discussed as well. There's quite a list that goes on here in America of people that don't trust the science.
And it's tempting, and I agree with the article, it's tempting to blame such benightedness on lack of education, but Republican hopeful Ben Carson is a Yale-educated former neurosurgeon, and he apparently believes that Darwin's scientific muse was from Satan. Right? It was from old Beelzebub.
Directly from.
And that's, I mean, it's easy to kind of jump on Ben Carson, but it's true of many in our political class. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Maybe not so much evolution, right? I mean, but there's a lot of anti-scientific ideas floating around on the left. I mean, you don't have to just...
Yeah,
it's not
GMOs
just Ben
and,
Carson's of this world.
GMO and autism on the left is one that they have issues with. I actually think that's an important piece, too, is that, Ben Carson's a neurosurgeon. He's Yale educated. He still denies evolution. So I think we can think about it like people who didn't have a proper civics class aren't really going to understand political atmospheres very well or the political processes very well. And people that don't have a good science teacher that shows the process over the end results aren't going to understand the actual process of critical thinking, and that's where science is so powerful.
I thought it was really strange, though, that there's mentioned here good evidence that scientific literacy is no protection against climate change denial. I mean, I understand it from kind of the... Jonathan Haidt, righteous mind perspective of this. And maybe that's what it's all about, I guess. But that scientific literacy, the process itself, right, which it has a billion safeguards. I mean, there's a way of weeding out bad ideas that even knowing of how that works would seem to be kind of a protection against stuff that goes against consensus.
I think for a lot of people it is, but there are people that are cynical enough to believe that every game is always tilted and scientific evidence can just be bought and paid for if you can pay for most of it.
Dan Cahan and his colleagues published a study in 2012 showing that survey respondents with the highest level of scientific literacy were the best equipped to argue whichever position on global warming suited to their personal interests. That's Heidian. I mean, that's what that's about, sure. Right? So, okay, well, there we go. Further confirmation. Everybody got to read Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. Brilliant book. But they didn't try to understand and analyze available climate data, right? They followed the routine. They went with stuff that confirmed their prejudices.
Sure.
Right? That confirmed ideas already inherent in their worldview. That made them comfortable, in fact, and that didn't release anything in their body that would make them uncomfortable or that would be there when people are in discomfort.
That's what a lot of people do. When someone says, well, prove it, a lot of people just go on and they're going to Google it. They're going to find something that backs it up, whether it's from a janky website or not, and say, look, there's my evidence to prove it. That kind of shows, especially if you're doing it with science, a misunderstanding of how the process works. It's through refutation of your preconceived biases. So you have to go and read the articles that challenge the belief and see what the consensus is. Things like climate change, I mean, I think it's They say this in the article, but it has to do with the fact that we're teaching science as it's a list of facts and not as a way of seeking truths about the natural world through a process. And understanding the process is it's just way more important than just thinking about the end game.
Do you think, though, that with people, and I don't want to ponder this too much, but like people in general on almost any subject, if they have an idea that they've settled on in their own mind, whether that, and obviously they don't think that they have insufficient reasons for believing X, Y, and Z, that if it's challenged and they feel that discomfort, that they're going to race, first of all, not to a thing that says, what is this about, right? Or, well, let me go read somebody who's advocating for it. But that their knee-jerk reaction almost universally is to go and seek out evidence that makes you feel comfortable again.
Yeah, because that's our nature, is to not want to go back over things that we feel we already know. Like, if the example I kind of think about it as, in a way it's like whack-a-mole, and you think of a different idea and you've put it down, and even if your idea is old and stale and you thought of this 10 years ago, a lot of people don't want to rehash that idea. I already thought about this when I was younger. I know exactly where you're at in life. I thought the same thing you did, and I had one solution that I've been happy with for 15 years. A lot of people aren't very happy with digging up ideas and looking at them again and confirming to see if they've changed at all. And so I think the knee-jerk reaction is to say, no, I'm going to go back and confirm what I already think I know.
The reel between their ears is still rolling.
Sure.
I mean, the whole time. I mean, they process it, they conclude something, and they happily roll along. And to have it come back goes, this is... I've already dealt with this. But you mentioned something just a second ago. You said a collection of facts, about science being taught as a collection of facts. In the article, there are a number of problems with teaching science as a collection of facts. First, facts change. And that's something people also need to kind of come to a grip with. And that's why science can say that it can change its mind. That was a stark difference between Bill Nye and Ken Ham.
Yeah, with new evidence, it can adapt.
And that's true of medicine, too.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that all facts are going to change either. It's a two-way street. It doesn't mean that one day we're going to find out that gravity's not real. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but the likelihood's very, very, very small.
The next two points, both of them we can talk about individually, but I love both of them. Another problem with teaching scientific facts instead of scientific process is that it encourages people to dig in their heels about what they think they know.
This is what we already talked about before.
Right.
Yeah, they jump into it. They get talking about the belief that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. An Australian gastroenterologist advanced a nutty theory about ulcers that was caused by weird corkscrew-shaped bacteria that hid out in the stomach lining. And by the time the writer entered medical school, the evidence for this theory was nigh and irrefutable. Still, many doctors refused to believe it, and for a while I did too. It wasn't until much later, after I had been trained to think like a scientist, that I realized I was no different from someone who rejected radiometric dating evidence about the age of dinosaur bones.
Yeah, but there are people. This is the one part of the article that I would have really contested. I would have said I'm a guy who's been forced, and I don't know as much about ulcers as the individual who wrote this. Mm-hmm. But there's research out there saying that, or at least statistics saying that some people have ulcers who don't have H. pylori. And although most do, that there are still some who may not have it and yet still have an ulcer. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you can send any corrections to paleoradioshow@gmail.com. Attention, Jeremiah.
Sure. And
for that.
Yeah, for me, I would say exceptions to the rule usually are evidence of the rule in itself. If most people have H. pylori from it, the likelihood that a person who has a stomach ulcer is it caused by H. pylori is more likely than it caused by stress.
By stress or by food or anything like that. Mm-hmm. A third problem with emphasizing information over process is that the interpretation of data requires critical thinking. That is in very, 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 very low supply today, Joe.
Absolutely.
Right? The idea of being a critical thinker.
And a lot of people, it's just way easier to have an appeal to authority. And I think that science totes this line where people say, well, it's just an appeal to authority. It's kind of like saying the president's right because he's the president. Well, the scientists are right because they're scientists. The difference is the evidence. Scientists don't stick with the same idea for 30 years unless the evidence is still there. The evidence changes, so does the idea. And that's why it's not so much of an appeal to authority, but it's an appeal to evidence.
And I would say, listen, I don't want to take that as a kind of anti-intellectual within the anti-intellectualism, that if somebody is a renowned scientist and respected by the community, I think that there's reason a lot of times for praise in that way. They are competent and qualified in what they're doing.
And there's also reason to celebrate if they make advancements and change a lot of their ideas, because they do. There's times where that gets changed and it gets adapted. Stephen Hawking and what he's come to realize about black holes and the physics surrounding black holes is revolutionary, and it's different than what the theories have been in the last 20 years. And you need new ideas to get to that next level. So it's important. It says in the article, we should also teach our children about the ways in which data can be misinterpreted or manipulated, and how much bias plays a role in how information is presented. Most importantly, if we want future generations to be truly scientifically literate, we should teach our children that science is not a collection of immutable facts, but a method for temporarily setting aside some of our ubiquitous human frailties.
That's our show, Joe.
That's our show. Thank you guys very much.
And make sure, if you're open on Sunday, January 17th, I'll be preaching the sermon for the launch of Sunday Assembly Grand Rapids at the Grand Rapids Commonwealth of Letters.
Definitely check that out, you guys. Thank you very much. It's been a great time. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.